Hey guys, it's Chad Corbett from All the Leads. I'm the co-founder, trainer, content producer, and a little wearer of many hats here. This is part of our Ask the Expert series, and today I'm not the expert. A friend of mine, Ivan Oberon, is an account executive with Civic Financial Services and has way more experience than me or probably anyone I know in private money. So today we're going to talk about private money, what you can do with that. And this is meant to be as beneficial to an investor as it is a realtor, or a rookie as it is an advanced, someone who's late in their career and doing thousands of deals. So, Ivan, welcome.
Thank you, Chad. Happy to be here. Always grateful for opportunities to share and add value to others.
Sure. So we started out focusing just on the brokerage community, and our kind of customer base is probably at this point 70% realtors, 30% investors. However, we've really been gaining traction in the investor space, and we cross train everybody. So for me, the conversation is no different. If you're a brand new wholesaler, or if you've been in brokerage for 40 years, what seems to be effective is really, it doesn't change that much. So we're kind of addressing everybody today. And Ivan's got a really interesting story. He kind of came, we all started with our first deal, right? So share a little bit of your background and kind of where you got, how you got to where you are today.
Man, well, it's a story that's been unfolding for about 10 years, really. And my background was in insurance. I was a duly licensed insurance agent here in Camarillo, California. And I went through a period in my life where I really had some challenges, and I got to a point where I had to really overcome my fear of getting out of that industry, because I had to get out of the industry. I had a life event happen in 2009, and I couldn't just jump out. I didn't even know what to do, but I knew that insurance wasn't my passion, right? Nobody gets excited about insurance. I have like a couple cool stories where you could say that I saved someone's life and like I actually did something, but insurance is kind of boring, right? It wasn't my passion. It's just that I was working for a family agency at the time, and I realized I need to get out of it. And I chose flipping houses. Flipping houses was going to be kind of my way out of that. It was going to be the way that I create a legacy for my family. And I had to realize that I was going to be an entrepreneur for the first time, really, in my life. And so that was the fear of getting out of a kind of comfortable situation, that's of the known. I spent a lot of years building that book of business, and I knew the business well. And I like to call it kind of jumping out of an airplane without a parachute and hoping there's water underneath. And that's kind of, I think, the genesis of a lot of entrepreneurial stories.
Right.
But in order to do that, I realized if I was going to be successful at it, I was going to have to figure out how to add value to other people. And I couldn't do that unless I made myself more valuable. So for the new guys out there, the first thing I did was I focused on my education. And once I knew how to talk about the business, like kind of how things are supposed to happen, I then decided that I was going to add value to private money investors, because I figured if everybody needs money, and I'm going to need money, I could probably be more influential if I control part of that or all of that.
So I want to back up. So you just rolled right into that. Private money investors is something so familiar to you right now. I'd kind of like to hear about, like, where was the aha moment where you realized, holy crap, I don't have to rely on banks. I can go get money from private investors.
Well, the aha moment really happened kind of through one of the seminars that I went through. So I don't, there's a lot of negative press sometimes around the seminar companies, and this one that I went to is actually out of business. There's a class action lawsuit that people try to get me involved in, but I actually didn't participate in that because I couldn't in good conscience do so, because what I learned there was the catalyst to me getting where I am today. But one of the things that they teach you, which I always thought was backwards, is if you find the deal, the money will follow.
Right.
And then, of course, they teach you about private hard money. They teach you about investors and gap funds. And I just thought that was backwards, because I was brand new. I didn't have a network of people that I could, if I had a deal, who do I send it to for the money to come, right? So I didn't want to be the guy that couldn't perform, get deals under contract, and then I didn't have a network.
Right.
So I also thought, okay, if working with hard money lenders and private money lenders in that space, I'm still going to need gap funds. Well, why don't I just focus on that? And I set the terms and I set the guidelines and the timelines and all that kind of stuff. So that was the light bulb moment that came on for me is I don't want to burn my realtor relationships who are going to be sending me deals, get them under contract and then not be able to perform because I didn't have the money.
Right.
So once I figured out how to get the money, that's when I really went full force into putting in offers and connecting with other people and ultimately connecting with somebody who had deals when I couldn't find any, but at least I had something of value.
So let's talk about those conversations. Like, so I think the biggest hurdle for most people is they're afraid to ask for private money, just like you were concerned about jumping in with both feet into a new industry. A lot of people will jump in and they'll spend down to their last dollar and they still never get the courage to go speak to a doctor, an attorney, a family member, someone that, and we know that if they're, if they're properly trained, it's as an alternative investment, it's going to beat the hell out of the stock market every time. So it's not like they're taking from those people, but I see so many people that never get the courage to go ask. And the people who I know who have accumulated the most capital, and we're talking in hundreds of millions, they are typically really casual people and they're just authentic. And they just step up and say, hey, man, I got this system. I proved it with my own money. But how did those first, let's just say your first 5 appointments, like who were the lenders and how did you approach them? And this is advice pointed towards somebody who's never raised capital.
Sure. And it is fear. And there's 2 things that cure fear, right? One of course is execution, because when you're doing it, you're kind of overcoming the fear. But I think one of the reasons that people are afraid, and it's because I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of people over the years, is that they don't feel confident in what they're talking about.
Right.
That's why I somehow realized that I need to make sure that my education piece was down so that I could talk about the process and tell a story of how it's supposed to happen, right? This is how it's supposed to work. But before I can tell people how it's supposed to work, I have to understand that fully myself. And so that's what I did, was I understood it first. And then I networked with other people who were doing it so that I could have a better understanding. And then I created what I call relationship leverage, because you never want to be dishonest, especially if you've never done a deal, right?
Right.
But I talked, because people like stories. They don't just want you to show them this and that. They like stories.
Sure.
So in conversations with people, I would say, oh, you know what? My colleague did this and that in this situation. My teammates did this and that in this situation. And they've done 12 flips like this, right? So I was able to leverage that relationship without claiming it as my own. And that helped the conversation. Sure. And I didn't want to really talk to friends and family about the business. I didn't want to ask them for money or to invest or anything. That's just kind of a decision and a rule that I set for myself. Smart. And many years later, I had family members ask if they could invest with me. But that's not where I started. I started in my network, right? Just like every other sales thing tells you to do is what's your network. And actually, it's kind of a funny story. The first guy who believed in me was a guy that, like I told you, I was in the insurance business, and I insured a few rental properties for him. So in my mind, I was like, okay, this guy at least likes real estate, right? He understands real estate probably better than I do, because I didn't know the first thing about real estate other than how to insure it. And so I called him, and he knew that I was going through my struggles, and that I probably, anyway, he took pity on me, really what it came down to when I asked him for the call. Because I said, hey, Kent, I'm going through something. I'm making some changes, and I'd like to discuss an opportunity with you that I think you'd be interested in. And he decided to take that appointment. I made time, and I went and met with him. And so I'll backtrack in a second. But the funny part was that at the end of our meeting, he just kind of like sat back with a sigh of relief. And he's like, I'm so glad I took this appointment. I was scared that you were going to try to pitch me on some MLM or something. I know you were going through a hard time. So I just wanted to like give you the time, but man, no, this is great. But before that is how do you have that conversation? Right. And it's here's kind of like, if I can give you a pro tip, this is just from a newbie doing this. I just realized that I needed to be able to have that confident conversation. So I created mock scenarios. This is what I mean. I would look at an address online, and I'd get a picture of it, And then I put the numbers in. Okay, if I could buy it for this, and of course I researched what values were and all that kind of stuff, right? If I could buy it for this and rehab it for this and sell it for this, this is the end result. And then you get to the bottom line of what the investors care about. If I give you 50% of the profits, this would be your return on investment, right? And then so I put this whole investor presentation together, and I would put comps in there. I would put different pictures. I put a general rehab budget in there, and I'd take them through it, and I would tell them if I find a deal like it, right? It's just a mock deal. I'm not pressuring them to close right now. It's just, if I can find deals like this, would you be interested in investing?
Right.
And once I started getting some yeses, and then started getting an idea of how much money they had to invest or willing to invest in the right deal, that's when I really went and started putting in offers. And I had to overcome another fear, the fear that we all want to do it and touch it and feel it and smell it ourselves. And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with investors. I've been in the business a year. I still can't get my first deal done. It doesn't work in my market.
Yeah. Never heard that before.
Right? It doesn't work in my market. 65%, blah, 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 doesn't work. And okay, so make it 70% or to go somewhere else. So that's, and I can say that confidently because that's ultimately what I did. Because when I got in the business, I live in Ventura County, all the hedge funds were coming in and they were buying all the properties at that time. So it was like 2010. And so when I had to create that's me. I had to create a 25 to 35% margin in my offers. When the hedge funds they're happy with 3 or 4%. So
Right.
they're underbidding everybody. But I kept networking. And then I found a lady that and her name is Susan. I'll never forget either of those two people's names because they helped me get in the business and get out of insurance. She had properties in Ramona, which is San Diego County, which is 3 hours away from me. So I developed a relationship with her. And then I just basically said, look, let's repencil this. And before I proposed it to her, I knew it was going to be a good deal for her. Okay, that's another kind of little tip. When you're asking somebody to do something, make sure that you're offering them something first and that it's a good deal for them.
Right.
Before you try to interject yourself in there. But I said, look, let's just get rid of this. And what if I bring all the money, you manage the project, we split the profits with the investor 50%, and then we split the other 50. And what do you think about that? And she thought it was a great deal. So did I. And that's how I closed my first deal. Right.
Nice.
And that's your first deal, right? It doesn't matter that you're not the one there touching and moving and hammering it and dealing with all the contractor stuff. You're in a deal. And that's how I did my first 51 flips, cash like that.
So you basically did a JV instead of just taking debt. Like you split profit on those deals.
Right. And that's what I tell people, especially if it's like their first one or two they're trying to break into. Don't be greedy. Yeah. Don't think it's a problem that you're not making as much money as you could, because 100% of nothing is nothing.
That's right.
So my first deal that we closed, my share of those profits was just over $10,000. And could I have made more? Yeah, but like, who doesn't want $10,000?
How many auto policies would you have to write to make $10,000 in your previous career?
A lot.
10,000.
A lot. Probably there's depending on the size, maybe there was a $100 commission on some of these, so it's quite a bit.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to leave that on the table, because the important thing is momentum, right? Like everything else in life. And that's why I always tell people, celebrate your little wins. Because when I look back and I tell stories, and like, I have to almost give myself credit, because I just don't, I was like, man, like I did that. Like that was actually pretty cool, man. How did I do that? I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And so that's what I tell people too. It's just like those little wins. So you close the deal and you made a few $1,000s or more, or whatever it is. That's a win. And then that momentum is the entrepreneur's best friend, because once you get momentum, it's hard to stop you. But if you can't generate it, it's hard to get going.
Right. So as you moved into that, and you said your first 51, you did that way, right? You structured that way. So at what point, I'm making an assumption here that you started to attract capital. Like you start to be a magnet for money once people see you're getting this right. And God bless Facebook for that. Like social media is awesome because people see you doing, and just like you said, your family member eventually came.
I didn't even have Facebook then. Like it took me 6 months before I realized that there was like groups and stuff.
Right. And that my point is it's so much easier. Like it's easier than ever to raise capital because you can do things like this. You can have candid conversations with your sphere of influence is captured in their device.
Yeah.
You've got it. So it's easier than ever. But so I'd like to, what was your next step, like the next transition? And also were you at this point in the game, did you have a pool of capital before you sourced the assets, or did you always wait to find an asset and then fund it?
No, it was always the capital first.
Okay.
Always the capital first, because same reason. And I wanted to be able to perform and come to the table with something. And the transition was, I had gotten over that fear of quote unquote rehabbing remotely. I did a whole webinar series on that once I kind of had figured it out, because I knew that's something people were really afraid of, and justifiably so. But again, I wasn't going to let that limitation stop me from getting into the business.
Right.
And with the mindset of how can I add value to people, my investors specifically, I decided that I wanted to change markets. And just like you said, the first guy that invested with me, he started off with 500 grand. That's kind of like what he committed to me. It's like, I will do up to this. So we did several deals in the San Diego County area, but guess what happened? He made 42% returns that year. And then he referred me to his anesthesiologist buddy, that he was an anesthesiologist too, but he actually ran their pension fund, and the guy had even more money, and like, so then I'm meeting up with him in Spanish Hills also. And so there's a transition that happens. So now I'm thinking to myself, I had heard that Indianapolis was a decent market. So I knew that I had a certain capital stack, and that with that capital stack, I could do probably about 5 times as many deals outside of California. So I started connecting with this guy that I knew was flipping houses out there. He was doing a seminar thing near me. So I went and met with him. I asked him for a dinner appointment. And I'm sorry, I don't know how to shut that off without shutting off my sound. Hang on. So we met, and I asked him for an introduction to somebody in that market. And then I had a conversation with my investors, and I said, look, we could buy properties. We could buy as many, like 4 or 5 properties that we can for this amount of capital. And the profit per property is less, but because of volume, we can do more. Right. So they agreed, and I kind of like exited California and went to Indianapolis. That's where I learned my hardest lessons in this business. And I had 2 things that probably didn't serve me. I was coming off a bunch of early successes, and yet I was still green for the most part. I was in my second year in the business. I was still very green. So the mistake I made there was trusting a referral without fully vetting them out. And it turned into some problems. And because it's remote, to me, I told myself, well, if it's 3 hours away or if it's half a country away, like it's the same thing, right? As long as I have the right person there. And I trusted that referral. And the long story is that the guy ended up being a criminal. He ended up being a shyster. He embezzled money from me. He did different things. And the long short of that is that it took me 2 years to recover and make that right. The things that happened because I trusted a referral from a guy that I thought I could trust, and didn't vet him out fully. So that's kind of like, I like to be transparent, because I actually revel in our failures, because I feel if you're honest about your failures and then you're still here, more than other people who say they haven't failed or who actually haven't failed, because that's where you really learn the lessons that you need, and you learn from those mistakes and you get better.
Hey man, the Stoics told us that 2,500 years ago, right? The obstacle is the way.
That's right.
Valuable lessons. I have a good friend, and he raised 40 million in capital, and it was an 8% preferred return. So it was like a hot potato, right? It's like you got to get money out the door on those terms. And he unfortunately experienced just what you talked about in 6 markets at the same time, and it was all bad people. It was, they weren't bad markets. It was bad people bringing bad deals to the table that did that. They didn't do proper analysis. Some of it was malicious. Some of it was just ignorance and lack of experience. But he
What
learned
happened?
his lesson too. I mean, he took some hard hits in that year and ended up holding 10 properties and having 10 separate, lawsuits over it. So, well,
So I'll say something to that, because when you're dealing with investor money, you gotta be careful. And by God's grace, and I believe my actions, I never got wrapped up in any kind of lawsuits. And here's why. So here's the number one thing to know and do when you're dealing with investors. Always, always communicate, and communicate clearly. And when things go wrong, you communicate even more.
yeah,
What a lot of people make the mistake of doing is they go and they bury their head in the sand, and they try to make it just go away. And people get upset when you don't communicate with them, especially when something's not going right. So what happened there? Of course, you contract, right? You go from expansion mode and excitement to contraction. And how do I make this right? And how do I still keep going? And there's a whole nother story of how I got started that leads into the next step in that evolution. But I figured that I need to grow my network, right? When I first started, that's what everybody needs to do. And if you believe in the whole saying of your net worth will be equally proportionate to your network, I figured, how do I do that? So I started attending little investor meetings and things of that nature. And then I had this kind of revelation of, well, here I am in the crowd. What if I was in front of the room?
right.
And I had a few flips, so I had a little bit of confidence. What if I was in front of the room and I can talk to all these people at once rather than doing that? So I decided to start a meetup. And I had my first meetup in Starbucks with 2 people. And then that evolved into, within a pretty short period of time, 5-6 months, we had 16 clubs across 4 markets.
Wow.
Primarily here in California, because again, it's kind of like the entrepreneurial journey of just figuring it out. Okay, trying to get paid. I was still in the insurance business, and by the way, I was growing my whole business covertly. Okay, the people that didn't know what I was doing for various reasons that I won't get into, but you think it's tough. You think you work a full-time job. You think, okay, try having a full-time job and not letting people know at your full-time job anything about what
You
you're
come in
doing.
the office and they're like, Ivan, is that drywall mud on your collar? No, I'm cheating on my wife, I swear.
Why are you going outside taking calls? Why are you closing your door? Why, like, seriously, interrogations of what? No, I mean, my clients have my cell phone number. They're welcome to call it. So like doing all these things and staying up till 1 o'clock in the morning, analyzing comps and going back to work the next day and doing that whole thing. But where I was going with that is we just made a decision, my partner and I at the time, that we had created this model. And of course, I had all my stuff. I had my spreadsheets that I created. I had my investor presentations. I had deal analysis and estimator for repairs. And so I had all this stuff that I created for myself. So I was like, okay, I have content. I have resources. We're creating this brand. We called it Coast to Coast RIA. We're creating this brand. What if we pitched it to another member that maybe has a little experience and just say, look, you start your club, you do your club, everything you get out of your club is yours. But if you bring in a speaker that sells something, we just want 50% of your take. Right? Because in those days, everybody brought speakers that sold. Now, of course, that model is completely shied away from, and that's great.
Right.
But we had a conversation and threw it out there, right? Yeah, so we'll do this for you. We'll even start your first meeting, and all you got to do is become a blah 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 and $5,000. And then somebody said yes. And then, so we did it again. And then we're like, okay, well, maybe we can ask for 10,000 because we have kind of a proof of concept. And so we did. And that's all cool. But again, that's part of like the weird entrepreneurial journey of just figuring things out as you go.
Mm-hmm.
But what that led to was taking an action where we went to our first expo. It was a Realty 411 expo by Linda Pelagas, and it was in San Jose. So we drove 5.5 hours to San Jose. And somehow Linda comes up to us. There's a gentleman here that I really need to introduce you to. He kind of knows about you guys and he wants to meet you. And we're kind of like, of course you're walking around like bigger than you are, right? Because you have to present an image.
Right.
But on the inside, we're like, someone wants to meet us? Like, how does anybody know anything about us, right? Like, and so we're like, yeah. So we walk in and the gentleman ends up being one of my greatest mentors in the business. His name is Mike Wren. And he's a fourth generation insurance guy, third generation investor, complete philanthropist, owns a huge insurance agency out of Kansas City, and has bought half of Marceline, where Walt Disney was born, because he went to school with Walt Disney. So he's got this whole affinity to business and to philanthropy. And somehow he's telling us that he's seeing what we're doing with our meetup groups, and he's starting this education company for investors. So his insurance agency is strictly tailored to investors only, right? So it's all fix and flips and rental properties, and apartments and stuff like that. But like, what? He's like, so we're, instead of competing with you, we'd like to consider resourcing what you're already doing to educate investors that are coming through your meetings. And how about you come out to Kansas City and meet with us sometime in the near future? And we're like blown away. And then of course he starts talking about insurance, because he's an insurance guy, right? And we're flipping properties. And so we had this interesting conversation that, of course, I had my properties insured. At the time I had 12 properties going in Indianapolis, and I had them all insured. But when I first started, I didn't have products for like rehabs and vacant properties. So I went and researched, and I finally got some research and some recommendations. And I found this company called National Real Estate Insurance Group. And I had 12 properties insured with them at the time. And so he starts telling me about insurance and these products. And I stopped him. I was like, I didn't know who he was really, like how much of an awesome guy he was and connected. But he starts telling me about his products. And I stopped him. I was like, look, I'm from the insurance industry too. I did my research. You're going to have to do really well to beat what I got right now for my flips. And they do this and that and the other thing. He just sat back with a smug smile. And he said, are you sure you're not insured with me already? And it was his company that I had 12 properties insured with at the time.
Nice.
And so that, of course, kind of created a kinship. And like I said, he just became a great mentor. And long story short, we did fly out to Kansas City. They made us an offer after a couple of days there, and I had to be completely transparent. And this is what got me out of the insurance business, because now they're talking about having us fly around. And I'm like, my partner had quit his job. And so he was free, he was fine, but I still was at the insurance agency, and nobody knew what I was doing still. And I just had to lay it on the table, right? Get over that fear of, if I expose myself as to why I can't do this right now, and the situation with my former in-laws and all this stuff, they might say that, okay, well, this isn't going to work. But I put it out there, and Tim, Mike's partner, leaned into me. He said, you know what, Ivan, it sounds like we need to get you the heck out of there. And I was just like, relief. And so they made an investment into that model. And then they also threw in a small salary for 12 months just to give me the little safety net, because I have kids, a mortgage I'm solely responsible for, to build it out. And that was a blessing. I went and put in my 30-day notice, and they used that full 30 days up to like 6:30 at night, my last day. And but then I was free. I was out. And so then I started investing in Kansas City. And I did like 37 turnkey flips out there as I was trying to go out of Indianapolis, right? So we went from expansion to contraction to I still need to do something. So I did something that I felt would be safer. And I started doing turnkey flips where we rehab a property, put a tenant in there, and then sell it to an investor. And I felt that was safer because at least we had cash flow that would cover the carrying costs, right?
And so at this point, was a lot of your capital coming from the meetup groups? Is that where you were finding your investors, or
just still my first investors?
Okay.
And their relationships. I attended one meetup. It wasn't mine. I attended one meetup, and I still know them. I still attend them every once in a while. But I attended it, and then I had one investor that came out of that. I don't know how it happened, but yeah, I got like 45 grand. I was like, oh, I have a property. So I did not pull that much money from my meetups because I wasn't really searching for it. Because I already by the time we really got them cranking, I had over $1 million cash that I was playing with. And so, and we weren't doing a lot at a time, but I was doing 12 in Indianapolis, and I still had some money left over because the properties were cheaper. Right. So I didn't really focus on it in my meetup groups.
So let's backtrack a little bit and take apart one of like your the way you structured a deal. So one of the things I'm sure people have questions like, How did you keep your books? How did you keep everything in order? If you had, $1 million you were playing with from 3 or 4 different investors, how did you keep all that separated? What were your accounting practices? And also, what was the deal structure on each one? Like, did you buy into a fresh, like a series LLC, or did you guys do a joint venture agreement? Did you take title together? Talk a little bit about how you manage the day to day and how you structured a deal. And also what lessons you learned and what you would have done differently from the beginning if you knew what you know now.
Sure. The one thing I will say is that from a technical compliance standpoint, I probably didn't do everything the right way. Right. And then I told you about my friend who's like one of the top SEC attorneys,
Right.
and we'll definitely have her on your show. But she taught me some lessons later on, years down the road. But I did have, so the important thing is to have a good relationship with each person and have an intimate understanding and knowledge of their ability to invest.
Yeah.
Right. Because the last thing you want to do is take somebody's everything. Right.
But at this time, you weren't targeting just sophisticated investors, right? You weren't.
No, I wasn't targeting anybody. Other than I was targeting people in my network that I already knew. Right. I wasn't doing Facebook blasts. I wasn't doing open general solicitation. I wasn't doing any of that stuff. I was just focusing on my network of people that I knew. And that's why, there was no issues with legal or SEC or any of that kind of stuff.
Right.
Where you can definitely get slammed if you're putting stuff on Facebook saying, hey, I need $150,000 from people you don't know. Right. Then you get slammed. But one of the things that I never wanted to be responsible for, and one of the pieces of advice that I give people is I never touched my investor's money, ever. There was a situation where he deposited a sum in my bank account, and I gave it back. I didn't want it, right? And I was like, dude, how? And that's a whole nother story, because anyway, but it was cool. But I always had the money always went through escrow. It has to flow through escrow, so there's the paper trail, and then I collaborated with the investors on the accounting process, and then I had a project manager who accounted for the draws and the rehab and things of that nature. So it wasn't
just to clarify. So you would get a kind of a verbal commitment to allocate capital. Then you would go get a deal, and then the capital wouldn't actually come into escrow until you had a deal in escrow for that capital. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. So exactly. That took a lot of liability away from you, right?
I would get the verbal commitment so that I knew kind of like, okay, what do I got to play with? Right. And that gives you the confidence putting in offers and whatever. And then when there's an actual deal in place and you break it down, you present it, and then the investor says, yes, I want to do this. Then that's when I would draft the joint venture agreements and have, we both execute them. And then when it came time to close, then the investor would just wire the money directly into escrow.
Okay. So backing up a couple steps there. So you're making offers in the name of your entity. I'm assuming that was an LLC. So it's your entity that's making the offer. And then once you've got a ratified purchase agreement, then you go sign a joint venture agreement with the investor and then trigger the wire into escrow for closing.
Correct.
Okay. Cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was my process. And then when properties sell, the money, again, wouldn't come to me first. The money would go straight from escrow right back to the investor's account.
And there was no note or deed of trust or anything recorded against title. It was just they were on, the lender was actually on title.
That's not necessarily true. Not on 100% of them. But yes, there was, because it was all cash, there was a first position note and deed of trust in the majority of the transactions.
Okay.
Some of them were just promissory notes that I held personally, that they didn't want to record a lien or they didn't need to record a lien. But yes, the majority of them were secured by a first deed position or lien position. And of course, you can't do that when you're using leverage, right? Your investors have to be comfortable in a second lien position.
Right.
But one thing that I learned in the years of doing this and talking to my friend Jillian, she doesn't invest in deeds of trust. She only invests specifically into the LLC that holds title.
Yeah. Because
a second lien position really, it's doesn't give you that much safety, really.
Good luck.
good
Right.
luck. And it really doesn't give you, and it's just a nightmare. We can talk about, like, what if you need to make an amendment, or what if you need to invest a little bit more money, and then you had to change that deed of trust, and they had to pay for a mortgage modification agreement, and then you had to do title and escrow, and you had to pay all these fees again, and maybe it takes 3 weeks to get it done. And I've experienced that because we came back from Kansas City, we came back around to do spec home development. And not personally, but I was funding deals for developers, debt equity structures, with my investors being on the equity. And so, we went through all these nightmares. And so, in my opinion, I would never record a lien position unless it's in first position.
Right.
I would invest directly into the LLC and get an ownership of the LLC.
Yep. So I'll kind of tell a little bit of my story, especially for any of you guys that are new in the private money conversation, or even new to investing or new to a market. I moved from Maui, Hawaii to Roanoke, Virginia, and knew nobody. And I came from high-end resort development, selling multi-million-dollar beachfront, ski front, into a town where the first house I bought here, I bought for 10 grand and flipped it for 18. And then it was just I was like, I made 8 grand on a piece of paper.
Right.
But I didn't see how you could make money in brokerage with a market median was only 140 at the time. So one of the first things I did is I went to my local RIA, which I didn't even know what that was at the time. I'm like, what is a real estate investors association? So I went to the meeting. They had weekly meetings, and where I grew up is on a farm about 125 miles from here, over 2 mountain ranges. So I would drive every Tuesday night. I would drive 3 hours to come to the meeting, and then drive 3 hours back home. I had like 6 hours of drive time just to come to like a 2-hour, 2.5-hour RIA meeting. I think it was my 3rd or 4th meeting, I was a presenter, because as I got to know the people in the room, I'm like, I was looking for opportunity, right? I'm like, how do I provide value? Just going all the way back to the beginning of your story. Like, and I try to teach this in everything that we do. Like, no matter if you're dealing with a client, a prospect, an investor, find ways to provide value, and opportunities will always, there'll be a steady flow. So what I realized is most of the RIA that I was part of was a great aggregation of real estate knowledge, but a lot of it was speculative and anecdotal. Like, oh, well, I just know what a good deal is, or I just make, I just have to have a good enough spread, or I like that zip code because it's a good one. And I'm like, yeah, but quantify that. What's a good one? And, I was hungry because I was coming from, where we were putting together, like the last project I was on was in Kaanapali in Maui. And it was an $850 million construction. It was a debt equity combo with Canadian banks and American investors. And so I was thinking along those lines. Like, I wanted to understand how people were putting deals together and how they did their market analysis. And because we were building these big resorts, we did lots of due diligence before we ever broke ground or pulled the trigger. So I kind of had that mindset still, that corporate mindset. So I was trying to get that kind of information from these hometown investors, and they were just like, what the hell are you even asking me? So I was like, all right, I got to get this info on my own. So I went and I pulled a year of MLS data, a year of GIS data, and merged the 2 data sets, and then boiled it all down into basically pivot tables and charts into a report. And I showed it to the organizer of the RIA, and I'm like, hey, man, there's some really neat, I learned a lot from this. And he's like, where the hell did you get this? And I spent like 40 hours making this report. And he's like, you're going on stage. I'm like, no, man, I'm not an investor. I'm trying to learn. He's like, now you're going on stage. And it was a happy accident for me, but I stood up there and I was confident. I had spent 40 hours crunching like the data from this market. And what I learned I think there were a lot of shocking revelations for those guys, but 27% of this market was happening off market. Those were under the realtors' radar. So the realtors that I showed it to were like, what? There wasn't that many transactions. I'm like, it's not all on MLS, man. And a lot of the landlords were just shocked to realize, that how many deals were cash versus finance and yada, yada. But I broke the entire MSA down by county, then by zip code, then by the type of deal. And so anyways, the net result of that is I didn't get out of there after that meeting until like 1 a.m. And from that day forward, everybody looked at me differently because I was this Hawaii realtor that came into, a town where I knew nobody in the room, but I had something that was valuable to them. So from that point on, I was like, wow, I'll just be the investor's realtor. Like I'll, and I was investing myself, and I went ahead and got my fourth license here. But
Hmm.
the number of, like, that's where I first started writing mortgages. So I had left corporate America. I rolled my 401k into a self-directed IRA with checkbook control.
Yep.
So literally guys would bring me deals, and I would write them a check, or I could literally walk into the title company and write a personal check and hand it to them. And the first deal I did might've been 25, 30 grand. And I had a first. I am still conservative. I went to a 50 LTV. And for anybody that doesn't understand that, so if a house is worth $100,000, I would loan up to 50,000. That's the 50 loan to value ratio. And I figured there, if I'm at a 50 LTV, even if they screw up, I'm going to double my money. And worst case scenario, I think the first one I wrote was no points, no origination, 12%.
Hmm.
And I did it through a self-directed IRA. So, there's tax advantages with that.
Yeah.
And it's a perfect investment for a self-directed IRA because you're not doing the work. You don't own the house. You're not going to violate any of the laws around that. So, but after that first one, word started to get out that, hey, the guy that did that presentation loaned me money on this deal. So I started doing short-term money, and they were really just almost bridge loans. So I got to know the landlords who had the most properties. I would write them like a 3 to 6 month, basically bridge loan. And then they would take me out with a blanket. They would roll the asset under a blanket lien with a local community bank on a commercial lien. So I was in and out in 3 months, and I was making at least 12% on my money.
Sure.
And then more people started to approach me. And so I've written everything from probably a 2-week loan term to 5 years. Like I have one now that's out at 5 years at 15%. So rule of 72, your money doubles. Like at 15%, your money's doubling every 3.4 years, 3.5 years. You're doubling your money at that interest rate.
Yeah.
So I got into it in a different way than you did, and definitely not at the scale you did. I think it's good to hear both stories. Like there's people on this call that are seeing like, holy crap.
You were the investor on the money side, and that's brilliant too.
What's that?
It's brilliant to be the investor on the money side too, right? Because usually the lender is usually in a better position, not always, but it's about getting creative. I had a guy approach me and I didn't have any money, but I owned my truck outright. I went and got a loan for 1.9%. I loaned it out to him at 20%. And I got that money back in 5 months.
Nice.
It's
20. Any points or just straight 20%?
Just give them straight 20%. I wasn't intelligent enough then or savvy enough to ask for points.
That's how I was in the beginning.
I'll loan you some money. Of course, now we charge some points, but that's because after spending some time on the brokerage side and the market softening and different things happening, again, you ask that question to yourself: how can I add value to the people I serve? And I figured that I could add more value by becoming that direct lender versus a broker or versus a guy that's structuring different capital sources that were outside of my control. And now we're probably the premier in the nation in what we do, which is just non-owner residential property deals. We're only in 15 markets, but we have all the capital that we need to help people scale. We did a little over $1 billion last year. We just had a pretty decent month company-wide. And we're a growing company. We only have about 212 employees, but we really are focused on that customer satisfaction and keeping people doing more deals across those markets, and West Coast and East Coast, and a few places in between.
So, guys, there's literally 1,043 ways you can structure structure deals. Most private money lenders are going to want they're going to want a first, like they want a first position lien to secure their investment. There are people who will do seconds. And for anyone who's really new to this conversation, we have kind of private money, hard money. There's different levels, and you can use community banks. Like some smaller community banks have good programs and will lend almost more like, on more favorable terms.
Mhm.
Hard money lenders, you're going to pay for that, because they're taking a higher risk, and so let's talk a little bit about, Ivan, like your programs and who they work for. And I don't know a whole lot. I mean, I know you guys offer kind of short term, medium term, longer term loans. Um, Talk
Yeah.
about how those are structured, and also one of the things I really want for everybody to hear is, what are the benefits to having access to like your programs for if they're an investor. Well, let's even say this: if they're a wholesaler, they're not doing their own deals. They're just right at this point. They're flipping paper still. They're trying, because everyone hears that, raise cash with wholesaling and go do this first. So how can a wholesaler benefit from having access to capital through a company like yours? How can someone, obviously, just like your story, someone who's actively doing deals and doing their own flips, that's pretty self-explanatory. And then the last thing I want, like, for the realtors on this call and the brokers, like, I see so many opportunities missed because agents, one, they don't trust investors, or they're intimidated by them, and they just never build the relationship to bridge the gap between the two parts of the industry.
Yeah.
Two, they don't have ways, they don't understand finance well enough to always have a well capitalized buyers list.
Mm.
And if you show an investor how he can get money and how he can get a deal, I mean, if he doesn't take that, then you get him off your list and go find one that will. But so many realtors could do so many more deals if they understood finance and how to lead their clients through getting them capitalized and then finding them deals. Kind of like, just like you went and got a pool of capital, then you were looking for deals, you were on the hunt. And anyone who's in brokerage, whether you're a brand new agent or a lifelong broker, you can increase your deal flow by probably 20 deals a year just by going out, learning about what your investors are doing. Are they long-term buy and hold? Are they fix and flip?
Mhm.
Are they building a portfolio that they're going to do a blanket refi on? Like, and how can you bring money to the table for them? So they're busy, they're doing deals, they're swinging hammers. But talk about a little bit as a realtor, and I'm sure you probably have some stories like how a realtor can use you guys as a resource, or any lender, but like, how can you use lenders like you as a resource to create deal flow in your business?
Yeah. So I'm going to remember all those questions. I'm going to tag them off one by one. So the first question really is about our programs, and I don't like spending too much time there because I think it's more important to know that we're a relationship building company. Right? We're Civic Financial, where our parent company is Wedgwood, and they're the largest flipper in the nation. They do 5,000 to 6,000 flips a year, and that's important just for everybody to know. But what I'd like to focus on more, other than cash out refi programs up to 80% of actual value, and rate and term refis, fix and flip financing, bridge loans, that sort of thing. We can get into deeper details in that in a kind of a different conversation or personal one-on-one. But
Sure.
the thing to understand is that we are there to be different, to close quickly, close deals in 5 to 10 days. We are very liberal in our underwriting because, unlike many people out there, and that's one of the reasons that I came over on Civic's side, is having had my own fix and flip background. We will work with a brand new real estate investor who's never flipped a house before, and there's ways for us to increase your perceived experience to give you the better leverage that you want, and close those deals. Credit isn't an issue for us, and we do a thing what I like to call best of both worlds, because a lot of people partner up. Sometimes one person has experience but no really bad credit, and the other person has no experience but maybe really good credit. And so I'm going to rate and leverage that deal based off of the person who has the best credit and based off of the person who has the best experience, versus the other way around, just give you the worst possible scenario. So that's important. The other thing is saving you money, and time. One of the things that we don't require, because our internal valuation department is pretty much the most experienced in the nation with the number of flips that we do a year. So properties in California that are $2 million or less, we don't require an appraisal. So that saves time and a considerable amount of money. We just do a simple 2-3 day BPO for $300. And outside California, any property that's under $1.5 million, and you know why that is. The properties are valued less outside of California.
So you're leveraging real estate agents on the ground to do a BPO.
Yeah, so we do. always order a BPO because the people that buy our loans require it as part of the package. But
Right.
our internal valuation team, we call it a WPO, or Wedgwood Price Opinion, that they set the final value, regardless of what it is. And quick example, I did a deal in Stockton. You know, the BPO came in at 475. Our WPO came in at 500,000. We lent that lady. She's never flipped a house before in her life. We loaned to her based off of the $500,000 value. She bought it for 424, so it was under market, and I gave her 90% of that purchase, even though she'd never flipped a house before, right? So we're very liberal, and it's important to get those values right and move quickly on those things.
Are you guys using AVMs, or is it all manual?
I guess most of it is internal, just based off of our own valuators' experience, and of course there are some data things that we have access to that other people don't outside of the MLS.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but we can turn those values around pretty quickly, and then we do have one thing that I'm most excited about right now is so Wedgwood, because they are the largest flipper in the nation. They also just happen to be the largest consumer of Home Depot products in the nation. And they've been working on a deal that's going to be released here probably within the next month. It's a first of its kind discount. It's going to be way greater than anything that your contractors can get at the pro desk, exclusive to our borrowers. So that's going to be another way we can add a great value to help them be more competitive and increase their margins, right? Because if they can save 20-30% on their rehab costs, how much more aggressive can they get? So that's another really cool thing that I think.
And I'll tell you what, that's really powerful right now, because I mean, any market that I know well that I'm looking at, people are paying crazy prices. You know, people doing their first flip, they're just desperate for a deal. They're like, I got to get one. And people are paying like 90 cents on the dollar, and it's hard to compete. Like, and you can only beat a good contractor so hard before he's like, the hell with this, it's not worth it, right? And so that's a pretty awesome incentive. That's neat. I've never seen a lender do that. That's a smart move, because it'll get your clients into a lot more deals that they wouldn't be in otherwise.
Right. Yeah, they just can't do it because we're in a very unique situation. So
Yeah.
that's great. That's coming up, and I guess our basic terms are 1, 2, and 4 year right now. We're coming out with a takeout 5, 7, and 10 for people who want to actually refi and hold but can't qualify for conventional. And there's no prepayment penalties on any of our products. You know, so it's very clean, very easy experience, and we're quick, etc. Right. So that's that part of the conversation. The other part of the conversation you asked about is realtors, right? And realtors are probably make up 80% of my referral partners, and also we'll touch a little bit on the wholesalers, because this is the same relationship that I have with realtors and wholesalers. But with realtors, one of the things that you have to do is open up their mind, right? And you ask them, would you like to close more deals this year? Would you like to be able to create a better living for your family? Would you like to take more vacations? You know, all those little basic questions that people are going to answer yes to in most cases, right? And then get them to realize that how hard they're working for their listings and for their buyers. How beneficial is that one buyer or that one seller? How many deals are they going to do? And on average, they're going to do maybe one deal every 5 to 10 years. Right. And then you have to go find your other client and hopefully get a referral. Well, the average real estate investor is doing 3 flips per year, and some of them are doing that or more per month. So if you build your network of reliable referral sources where you can bring deals to or offer capital, right, to, maybe you get 10 or 15 of those, and that's it. That's all you need. You just nurture those 10 to 15 people that are already doing 5 times as many deals or more than your one buyer or your one seller, right? So that, like, once you get to get them to realize, oh my gosh, like, I'm leaving a lot of money on the table. What do I do now? It's just a matter of changing some of the verbiage. You're already marketing. You're already putting yourself out there. It doesn't cost any more time or money to add some seeds to that field of attracting investors. And if you don't have a deal, one of the things, another reason I chose Civic, is we are able to pay great referral commissions on to our referral partners just for bringing the deal. So if you don't have the deal, but you have somebody that has a deal or maybe just needs a reliable capital source, and you start sending those things in, every time I close a deal for somebody else, even if it's not your own deal, you're getting compensated. And on the wholesale side, how many more deals could you close if you had a reliable capital source that you included with your wholesale deals? Here's the deal. I've reviewed it. I know I'm going to, provide this kind of financing for it, and boom. And there's a couple of guys out there that won't actually sell their deals to anybody unless they take our financing, because they know that they're being compensated. They're getting their wholesale fee. They're getting compensated on the loan. And if they're a realtor and they have the deal, now they're getting compensated because they sold the property or something, right? So there's so many different ways to stack your earnings if you partner with the right people.
And the other thing, like for anyone who's in brokerage, I mean, not only are you capitalizing a buyer, you're also creating a future listing for yourself in most cases. And I teach people, so we're obviously heavily in the probate space here at All the Leads. So the average inheritance in the U.S. is around $177,000. And most people will let off the gas and just be like, hey, thanks for letting me help. Have a good life. And they go on. Just like you said, it's a one and done transaction. A good realtor can step up and say, okay, now that you've done that, I want to give you an opportunity to sit down and have a discussion about what what your possibilities are for reinvesting, the distribution from the estate or the inheritance. And we sit them down with a registered investment advisor to look at traditional financial products. But also part of that conversation is, what if we could double your money every 3 to 4 to 5 years? And it could be right here in town. And, honestly, your risk is if they screw up, you make even more money. Like if we could show you a way that we can mitigate as much risk as possible, and you can aggressively grow the proceeds from this estate to pay for college, to pay for, to start your own investment portfolio, whatever that is. Sure. And you can take a seller who, someone passed away, they become a personal representative. They represented the estate. You liquidate the estate. They've got cash. You take that cash, turn them into a private money lender, go to your cash buyers list, take the next probate house, sell it to that guy, use the money from the last seller to fund the deal, take the next listing, get that commission, and then you have a bigger number in that person's pocket, and it can very quickly snowball. I mean, if you're doing this with a half a dozen clients, you probably have enough capital to go around for everybody, especially if you're in a state like California, where you've got, like tons and tons of equity in these probate homes. Some of them are, 67% of probate homes are free, 76% of probate homes are free and clear. So in California, you're talking about, $300 to $30 million homes that really have no debt. So it only takes a couple of these relationships, of clients, and it's service after the sale. So you did what you said you would do. Now continue to provide service, like take their money and make more money for them, and their money brings buyers to you. So even if you're not the one in the deal, even if you think that, this conversation is not for me, I'll challenge you to say it could be. You could do a lot more deals and make a lot more money and have a lot more opportunity if you can think outside of the box like this.
And how much more effort did it take, really, Chad? You stopped from, okay, thank you very much, move on with your life, to, hey, and by the way, what about if we consider doing this, right? Take an extra 5 minutes of your time. And again, that's the excuse. That conversation is not for me because I don't think I could do it, is the excuse that you got to break through. Because if you have that opportunity, they could reach out to you or anybody in your network or somebody else to help them. And that's where you overcome the greed part and say, okay, this person's going to get compensated too, so we're going to make less together, but at least we're going to do it, right? And then maybe you learn along the way and then you start doing it on your own later. But it's just having that extra little conversation and the presence of mind to ask.
Yeah.
Where a lot of people, I think, fall short because you're just like, oh my gosh, we're done. And then you just kind of like run out the room, right?
Yeah.
And so I have that problem sometimes too. Just like, dang it, I go to an event and I forgot to take a picture. Like, where's my social proof, right? It's like now, yeah, social media is very important. So
yeah, we all do that.
Yep.
It's always when you get home, you're like, damn it. But
my wife asked me, did you take any pictures? Like, oh, next time I will.
Right.
So that's cool. I actually was on your call yesterday.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was neat. I listened in on some of that. Always learning. There's two things that have served me very well in life that I learned early on in my personal development journey is always remain teachable and always remain willing to accept change. Because those two things will help you more than anything else, I think, and I have found, because no matter what room you walk into, whether the person talking or you're having a conversation with is the same faith or political views or age or anything else, if you let those things stop you and you put up a wall because you have these preconceived judgments against that person, it's going to prevent you from a potential learning opportunity.
Mhm.
So what I usually tell people is just look at those conversations and those people as a buffet. You take everything that serves you and brings joy to you, and you leave everything else there. But at least you kept yourself open to learning something, because I guarantee you can learn something from a 3-year-old kid, and you can learn something from, somebody completely on the opposite side of the political spectrum as you that has different religious backgrounds. You can take something from it, and that'll benefit you. And you don't have to subscribe to everything else. And of course, always be willing to accept change, because that is really what we all crave, is change. If we had everything that we wanted, we wouldn't need to change certain things, certain habits, certain people that we hang around with or don't hang around with. Certain things, change those things. It's uncomfortable, but that's where you find that next level of success that you're looking for.
So you put it a lot more eloquently. I train people to ride motorcycles off road, and we start every class with, okay, so you're gonna, like, if you can give me two things, this day's gonna be worthwhile. The first is an open mind. The second is a shut mouth, because it's everybody goes straight for the excuses, and it's like, no, it's not that. You ran out of ability, and your ego won't let you admit that. And the people who can do what you suggested, and I don't want to seem like I'm downplaying it, but when you can open your mind to all the possibilities and get rid of those preconceived notions, you can accomplish so much more, whether it's riding a motorcycle or putting together your first private money deal.
Right.
Great advice. Well, we're right at an hour. Tell people how they can get a hold of you on social or phone or whatever's the easiest way to get a hold of you.
Of course.
And then also, if there's anything anything that I haven't asked that you think that would be valuable to an audience of investors and realtors, please throw that in.
Sure. Yeah. Just Ivan Oberon. You can find me on Facebook. Also, you can find me on my site, Ivan Oberon Ivan Oberon civicfs.com. You can find me there too, and get in contact with me. The only thing that I would really say to everybody, regardless of how new or experienced you are, because I think even the experienced guys, and I've suffered from it myself, is sometimes we fall away from the habits that we know served us, that when we started and we got to a certain position, and then we become complacent because we get to a certain position, right? So just focus on daily personal development and get those e-mentors, right? Like, I'm sure we can both rattle off the list of names of our favorite people, like Brian Tracy and John Maxwell and Tony Robbins and Grant Cardone and Dale Carnegie, like all these different people that bring different value. Napoleon Hill, they all bring a little bit different perspective, and spend time with those people. That's the best way to get mentorship for almost free, practically, is by spending time in those people's content and those people's books, and helping you create those daily habits. And the first hour of the day, Tony Robbins calls it the power hour. So make sure that you control that first hour of your day, that you're doing your devotionals, your meditations, your goal writing, and your affirmations. And if you don't know how to do any of those things, there's plenty of resources and plenty of people that can help you do those things. And lastly is overcome your fear of taking action, and be okay with knowing that you're not going to be good in the beginning at whatever new thing it is. And multimillionaires have that same fear, okay? Because there's always something new to do, but they learn how to push through that fear and do it. And the results will come as a result of it. You can't steer a ship until it's out of the harbor, until it's moving. So you just got to get moving in whatever direction you're going.
Yeah, it's funny. That's evidenced in so many different areas of my life, and it seems like such a simple thing to me now. It's part of how I operate. But I only have to look back about 6, 7 years to see the guy that didn't know that lesson.
Mm.
And I put my work in. Have you walked on fire with Tony Robbins yet? Sounds like you might have.
I haven't yet, but I've been around him a couple times.
So if you've never done a UPW, and this is everybody that's watching this, go to Unleash the Power Within with Tony Robbins. It kind of sounds cliche to say it changed my life, and I was like the biggest skeptic. But I went, and then I went back last year, 4 years later, and I'm like, holy shit, it changed my life.
Yeah.
Like I started to look at the world differently, and like the excuses fell away, and I got clear on intent and purpose, and didn't even realize what an impact it had made on me. So a lot of folks ask me, like they hear me role play and they hear like, teach, and they're like, where do you learn this stuff? And I'm like, it's exactly what you said. It's not all from Tony Robbins. It's a combination of exposure to lots of different people. I mean, like, for example, Think and Grow Rich is the one book that almost everyone will point to and say, that's it. You got it. And that book just didn't speak to me. Like it's on my shelf. I'm looking at it right now, but it didn't resonate with me like some of the other stuff has, like Tony Robbins books. And Tim Ferriss, I think, is a wonderful writer that some people hate. But exposing yourself to all the different kind of content, there's so many good messages in there that aren't real estate specific, but the biggest challenge in real estate, everyone, 90% of it's showing up or taking action. And so few people get to that point. Like there's so many that what they call them, shelf improvement books.
Yeah.
You go to a seminar, you buy a $2,000 binder, and it sits on the shelf for the rest of your life. But
Well, it doesn't have to be about real estate, right? Even though that's kind of the space where we operate the most. It's all about really building your habits that serve you, because your habits ultimately create your outcomes. And
right,
so one thing I'll say to people is that if you're dissatisfied with the situation that you're in right now, understand that you put yourself there. Your life now is a sum total of every single action or inaction that you have taken in your life up until this point. So if it's not where you want to be ultimately, or it's really completely the opposite of where you want to be, let yourself soak in that sting of, okay, I kind of caused this, right? Because accountability gives you power. And then have hope in the fact that you can change it. You also have the power to change it. And so do so.